Allard's neighborhood. This is the place where you're entitled to Brad's opinion. And now for your host, Brad Allard.
Hello, everybody. It's time for enlightenment and entertainment once again. You hear me okay, Taylor? I'm coming through all right?
I can hear you good.
All right. How you feeling today? Sounds like you're a little clogged up.
Oh, allergies. Gotta love it.
Allergies. Yeah, you sound like you're in the basement. You tell me you're working for the
Yes,
church
I am
today.
multitasking today.
Well, God appreciates your service. A jewel in your crown.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, hey, did you know we're about to finish up on the best month you ever had on podcasts ever?
I love to hear that. I
I mean,
love to hear
by a
that.
significant number. I mean, they really have picked up pretty well in the last 6 months. I think what's happened a lot is that people are saying, "I wanna hear this on the podcast more. I don't wanna sit down and, sit around on the, Facebook or whatnot." But I think also the YouTube has helped a bit. I've had several people say that they access YouTube because they got their issues with Facebook, and that's all well and good, but, they're all, they like the podcast situation better. Um Anyway, I'm trying to share this with some more folks here. Ah, there we go. I'm sharing that. Okay, I'm going to share this on the news feed, and we're going to be good to go. Um, Today we're going to talk about how much responsibility does Joe Biden have with the economy, or any president, really, for that matter. This question was brought to me by Jordan DeWald. Everybody that listens to my show fairly regularly knows Jordan. She also is a good friend. We shared time together at BHS, or did time together, I guess is a better way to put it. But basically, she was asking me the question: how much really should we blame Joe Biden for the economy, or how much credit should we give Joe Biden for the economy? The truth of the matter is, it's a mixed bag at best. However, I will hasten to say that many of the policies that Joe Biden has put into place or wants to put into place have inhibited economic growth. It has not helped at all. And that's going to be the gist of it. Plus, she asked about what's all this business about the Federal Reserve raising rates and how can they do it, and what about are they just printing money and things like that? And all these things are good questions, very good questions. Somebody is calling me right now. It's probably Joe Biden saying, "We don't want to you talk about this." Who's on the phone? Hello, Mr. President. No, go away. Leave me alone. Anyway, um, the point is that we'll find out today what the Federal Reserve has in mind, what it does to the economy, for the economy, et cetera, and my concerns with how Joe Biden is directing the Federal Reserve, and does he have the authority to direct it? Mr. Trump certainly did, and the Federal Reserve basically told him to drop dead, but we'll see what happens. But before we get all involved in the details and whatnot, let's talk about our sponsors because they make all this possible. Thank you, Daniel CrossFit Burleson. Check out the webpage at CrossFitBurleson.com and find out about the programs, the protocols, the membership plans, things like that, the hours of operation, you name it. Thank you, Daniel, for your sponsorship. Appreciate everything you're doing. I hope you and the kids are safe from this COVID season. I know that you had COVID a couple of weeks ago, but from what you tell me, was manageable. Thank you to Shandy Stocks, Delta Stocks Realty Group at the end, the 817life.com page. That way, if you want to find out what's going on in the real world, so to speak, around this area, you do definitely want to uh, check out that page because it's really very good. It talks about all these various things that they have going on in the 817 life, if you will. Uh, Also, if you're looking to buy in and around this area, you definitely want to talk to Shandy, and she can help you with the interest rates as well. And I'll be talking about interest rates some today. I'm not as good an expert at this as maybe your husband is, but they can help you with that. Thank you to Rex Russell at the Russell Wealth Group. He definitely would be interested in this. I've had him on a couple of times. Going to have him on again, probably within about 6 to 8 weeks with myfinancialbox.com. Hit the link, get to know him, get to see what he's doing, and you'll find out what he can do for you in your 401k and your retirement plans and whatever savings plans you have, your IRAs. Fill in the blank. He can help you at Russell Wealth Group, myfinancialbox.com. Thank you to Kimmy Etheridge at Optavia. It's not just a weight loss plan, it's a weight maintenance plan. It's a lifestyle plan. So at 817-789-1622, call Kimmy and she'll talk to you about getting on board and what the cost is and what the what the regimen is, whatnot, and she'll help you with your whatever weight loss plans you have and maybe health improvements you may have. Thank you to Gayla Moores over at Southern Gym on the top floor of the Windmiller Building. It's Valentine's Day in 2 weeks, and she can help you with something for your sweetie. She can help you with cleaning, design, repair, the whole thing, the inventory. It's a full service jeweler. So thank you, Gayla, for all your help, for what you do to this community. Okay, here's the thing about the Federal Reserve and all this other stuff. All right. When I'm teaching my economics classes in high school, one of the more difficult things to talk about without going into, a lot of graphics and drawing on the board and whatnot is what the function of the Federal Reserve is and what the purpose is and how much authority it has and things of that nature. I don't want to turn this into an economics lesson strictly because, the eyes glaze over and whatever else. But the point is the Federal Reserve, in my opinion, is the single most powerful actor in our economic system, for good or for worse. It was created in 1930 with several functions in mind, primarily to stabilize the credit situation and to keep prices and employment at sustainable levels and to regulate the banks. Because right at that point in our history, there was no real national regulation of banks. It was all done on a state by state basis, and one state varied greatly from another, and that kind of thing. But basically, it was designed to kind of overhaul the monetary and banking system and the credit system of our country, and put it into a single hand, similar to central banks in European countries. But there's a couple of key distinctions. Most people assume the Federal Reserve, because of the name maybe, is a part of the federal government, and actually it is not. The federal government does control it like they would control a public utility or some other type of situation similar to that, but in reality, the Federal Reserve is a private institution is a better way to put it. It's a private institution. Who owns the Fed? It is owned by the banks that participate in its services. It's like a co-op. If you live out here in the country, like I do, you get your water and your electricity from co-ops. When I moved to this area quite some time ago, I bought into Bethesda Water and at the time Johnson County Electric, now United Cooperative. So I actually have stock in those companies in a sense. And the only stockholders are the users of the water or the electricity. And when I move, if I ever do, the stock will be part of the purchase price of this home because that's the new user will be using it. And I do receive a dividend normally from the United Cooperative. I did not this year because of the crisis they had about a year ago. Okay. So that being said, again, who owns the Federal Reserve are going to be the banks, the state banks that choose to participate, and the national banks that have to participate in the Fed. They own a stake in the Federal Reserve. Okay. That being said, the Federal Reserve is not a entity that can operate entirely without government oversight. The leadership of the Federal Reserve is by the Board of Governors, which is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Now, the real action, if you will, in the Federal Reserve System is the 12 regional banks. We are in Region 11, and our main bank is in Dallas. And many times, many of my former students may remember we used to take tours of the Federal Reserve Building over in downtown Dallas. I did that with BHS and Southwest Christian. Now, what are the functions of the Fed? They have a lot of functions to oversee the banking situation, to create lending rules, to inspect on audit member banks. They transfer currency and coin from one region to another. One of the biggest things the kids got a kick out of is the currency room, which is pretty big, and they'd have millions of dollars currency being counted and bagged, and it's going to be shipped to one region or another, or it'd be shredded, or the coins could be sent to the mint for melting and reuse. Now, let's be very clear. The Federal Reserve does not print money. That is the U.S. Treasury, like the printer up North Fort Worth. The U.S. Treasury handles the currency and coin in the situation. So when I say the Federal Reserve is creating money, it's a virtual thing, not a physical thing. Okay, and I'll try to describe that in a few minutes. But the point is most people think the Treasury and the Federal Reserve are kind of one and the same, and that is not the case. The Federal Reserve does not print money. And when I say creates money, it does so through transactions with the federal government and their member banks, not by calling up the Treasury and say, hey, print up a whole bunch more $100 bills. Or call up the Denver Mint and say, we need a bunch more quarters. That doesn't happen. Now, the primary function of the Fed is to monitor and regulate the interest rates. The base rates that they lend to their member banks is the basis by which all credit rates are based upon. So if they raise or lower interest rates with the member banks they deal with, then it will reflect on loans for your car and your house and your credit card and the whole 9 yards. Everything is based on that. It's like the root interest rate, if you will. Now, when I say the Federal Reserve is raising or lowering interest rates, what they are really doing is altering the money supply that will cause a raising or lowering of the interest rate. They're not just arbitrarily going, by our wave of my hand, we raise interest rates half a percentage point, which would be significant if they did. That's a lot, actually. What they mean is that we're going to create the conditions that would result in a rise in interest rates of 0.5%. And it'll be the basis by which all the other rates will follow. And right now, the effective interest rate between the Federal Reserve and its members banks is barely above zero. It's almost cost-free for the member banks to borrow money from the Fed and in turn get you to borrow it. This is another thing. I'm trying not to get too technical about it, but member banks have deposits in the Federal Reserve. Well, let's take First National here in town. They have a deposit over in that Dallas bank, and they could draw on it or put money into it depending on what their loan situation is. You don't want to put money in it. Well, let me rephrase. If you're not lending everything you can, you'll transfer it with a few clicks of a button to your account, very similar to how you pay your bills or do your other deposits. Just they'll send it to the Dallas account, and it'll reside in that account and earn very low rates of interest. And if they need that money, because some people come in with a rush for borrowing, they can withdraw it up to down to a certain amount and then distribute it to potential borrowers. So one of the things that the Dallas Bank and all the others, they have Federal Reserve regional banks in St. Louis and Atlanta and San Francisco, Boston, Kansas City, which is an interesting place, but that's another story. But the point is that member banks, if they need money, they can get it from the Fed. This is particularly important when you're dealing with agriculturally based banks, and they get a lot of borrowing demand in planting season, and they get a lot of excess money in harvest season, hopefully. And so if they need money to lend, they can get it from the Federal Reserve at very low rates. And the lower the rates they get, the lower the rates you get. Okay? That's how it works. Now, you following with this, Taylor? He's asleep.
I'm not asleep. I'm muted.
You're
We have
muted.
gone over this. We've gone over this. I mute myself when
Yeah.
you're talking because everybody wants to hear you and not me.
Yeah, well, did I explain that well enough?
No, you did. It's a lot of numbers and a lot of different stuff, but
You more or less get the point.
More or less.
Yeah. Well, to sum all this up, the Federal Reserve does have the authority to raise or lower interest rates by creating or restricting money access. And why would they raise the interest rates? If we are in an inflationary situation like we are in now, the primary response, according to Keynesian theory, it's been there for a long, long time. Jordan says it's very helpful. Good. That's good. The primary response in inflationary situations, we need to cut spending. The primary driver of inflation is one of two things: either excess demand or insufficient supply, which we both have now. But right now we have much excess demand. In order to try to lower excess demand, they'll try to raise interest rates, which will slow down spending. Hopefully, if your credit card interest rates go up, you may not buy what you thought you might, or you may pass on buying this car or whatnot. Now, if we are in an employment situation, the response is to lower interest rates to stimulate spending. Also, lower interest rates stimulate supply growth because it'll allow producers to borrow more money to produce more stuff and, expand their factories or expand their marketing or whatever. And if we are in an inflationary situation, higher interest rates may cause them to reconsider that borrowing decision. So the bottom line is interest rates are seen is like either a spigot to increase spending or a spigot to decrease spending, depending upon the economic situation at hand. And the authority to do so was given to them in 1913. And they could do this without Congress or the president overruling them. Okay. They could do this independent of political restrictions. Now, the chair once a month goes to the Senate and the House and gets chewed out by various people talking about his easy or hard money policy or whatever else. But the truth is, if all 100% of Congress said, we want this to happen, and the Federal Reserve said, no, this is what's going to happen, the Federal Reserve, by design, is supposed to win that argument. Now, a good example of this is when Reagan took over in 1980, the chair of the board of governors was a guy named Paul Volcker. He had taken over a year prior. And he said that we're going to take on inflation first, which means very high interest rates. Reagan comes in. He wants Volcker to lower the interest rates so they can stimulate the economy better. And he says, nope, we're going to get rid of inflation. And Reagan, publicly, he didn't say, a lot of trash about Paul Volcker. I have no idea what he said about him behind the scenes, but it didn't matter. Paul Volcker decided we're going to lower the interest rate, or rather, lower inflation by raising interest rates and decrease spending. And that's what happened. It took about 3 years to do it. So at the Federal Reserve under Jerome Powell, who's our current chair, says, we're going to raise interest rates and cut down on spending, and Joe Biden starts raising Cane. Joe Biden can go sit in the corner somewhere because the Federal Reserve is supposed to have the last say. Now, what influence does Congress and the president have over the board is more on who is running it and who is appointed. And that's going to be something I'm going to discuss probably in the latter half of the show. But the president has the ability to appoint vacancies on the board of governors. And through the various organizations in the Fed, like the Federal Open Market Commission and other advisory committees that they have formed, they'll determine what to do with it. About their interest rates, be precise. And, Joe Biden is going to be able to appoint up to 3 members of the board of governors. There's a couple of vacancies right now. But I really want to get into a couple other things before I get away from it. Another question Jordan had was about the debt and the bonds and all this other business. Who creates the bonds is the Treasury Department, not the Fed. It's the Treasury Department. They're the ones empowered to issue credit on behalf of the federal government through the bonds. Who buys these bonds is a different question. And how does the money get into the system? When every time the government sells bonds, okay, if they sell bonds to the public or to private institutions or public institutions, it gets the money that it supposedly needs for all these programs are got running on, such as Build Back Better and all this other stuff. The single largest individual owner of government debt is the Social Security Administration. Now, that sounds strange. The government debt is owned by the government institution. That doesn't sound. Here's what happens right now, at least for the time being, and not much longer, but for the time being, the Social Security fund has a surplus. And rather than having that money sit in a bag somewhere to sit in some debt account, what they'll do is they'll take that excess and buy government securities with it. So at least it's earning, very minimal interest, but at least it's earning some. The Federal Reserve is the second largest holder of that debt. When the government issues that those bonds, the Federal Reserve will buy hundreds of billions of dollars. They've been doing that. It's called quantitative easing is a word used. It's another way of saying expanding the money supply. That's what they're really doing. They're buying these government bonds and they're holding on to it. See, and the thought is the government gets the money and the Federal Reserve gets credit bearing instruments and bonds, and therefore they're not losing value. But see, the thing about it is most of the bonds that are owned by most of the bond debt that's owed by the federal government is owed to the American people themselves. That's the real issue here. And that's one reason why, and I disagree with this assessment, but it's one reason why people don't think of debts and deficits as important. I think they are. But here's the thing. I want to rephrase it because I don't know if I really said it right. When the Treasury issues bonds, they do so with the cooperation of the Fed. No, the Treasury Department knows the Fed's going to buy them. They've already made this arrangement. And the Fed will buy hundreds of billions of dollars worth of bonds. They own right now about $5 trillion worth of government securities. And so when they buy these bonds, the government gets the money and the Federal Reserve doesn't lose any value. Now, so where's the Federal Reserve getting the money? They have the authority to create money. They have the authority to do this. Most people who have a very shall we say, a rudimentary understanding of money, think our money is based on something of value. You know, it used to be gold and silver about 70 years ago, but they think it's based on, some tangible piece of value. It's just all our money is based on. The $5 bill in your pocket is based on the credit of the United States government. Because the government says this piece of paper is worth $5, then therefore it is. And the Federal Reserve has the ability they're not cranking up the printing press. They're just saying, you need $50 billion this month in bond purchases. Boom, it's done with a few clicks of a button. And money is created just like that. And people think it's voodoo and magic, but it's not. It just that they have the ability to create money with basically just an application of the software, and that's about it. So that's where a lot of people get confused. They think when they say increase the money supply, they're just thinking of loading up the trucks and printing up more stuff. No, most money that you and I spend is not in tangible form. It's online. And prior to that was through checks. We don't use checks nearly as often, but when we pay I pay United Cooperative, I am in effect sending them a check. It's a metaphor. It's just a virtual check. 20 years ago, I wrote them a check. And so most people dealt with money not in currency and coin, but in instruments like checks or drafts or letters of credit or things like that. And now they just mostly do it online. I've been with Taylor all this time. I never gave him $1 in currency, but I pay him every month online. And so you should think of the Fed's creation of money and its dealing with the federal government in a similar vein. They create the bonds. The Federal Reserve says, here's your money. And it's just like that. And a lot of people are very leery of this situation because you say, what's the control over it? That's when you have to have the right people running the Federal Reserve. And if they create too much, it leads to inflation. If they don't create enough, it chokes off credit and leads to depression. One of the main reasons why the Great Depression in the 1930s lasted as long as it did is because the Federal Reserve failed to adequately supply the economy with enough money. It's almost like you put a tourniquet on an anemic patient. I've often in my class used a physical analogy to money, to blood in the body. Okay. If you have too much money in the economy, it's like having high blood pressure. If you don't have enough money in the economy, it's like being anemic. And so that's pretty much how this works. And the Fed's responsibility is try to balance that out. And before we get into the second round of commercials, to say this, A very small increase in the interest rate has large ramifications for our economy and our federal budget. Large ramifications, magnified ramifications. You think, well, what's a quarter point? Is that a big deal? It's a big deal because of the amount of money we're talking about here. Okay, we're not talking about, okay, my credit card bill interest rate, my credit card interest rate went up a quarter of a point. That's not a big deal. When you talk about the amount of money we're talking about here at the federal level, a quarter point means a bunch. So let's talk about their second round of sponsors before I get to it. I see Sherry Step Scott's watching. I last saw on her blessing box page that some one stop at Renfro could use a little attention. So there you go. I hope this helps. All right, but let's talk about our second round of sponsors. Thank you, Otto, for everything you do at our place. I'll be seeing you later this week. Hope things are going well. I hope you're avoiding all this. This poor Slav got COVID twice, and so he knows what I'm talking about. But thank you, Otto, for everything you're doing for the community. It's on the highway in Alsbury. It's been there since 1986. So you want to drop on by and get yourself a decent meal, and a great meal, actually, for a decent price with great service and happy people. Thank you to Chris Notaboom at Wild Cigar. I keep doing that. At Wild Cigar and Culture, Chris Notaboom had the playoff games on this past weekend, and I'm quite sure, even without him having to tell me, he's going to have the Super Bowl on, a big to do. So if you're looking for a place to watch the Super Bowl in a decent place with a decent drink and cigar, you won't do any better than Wild Cigar. It's the best place around for that. Thank you to Antonio over at Proactive Payment Solutions. Come on. There it is. Proactive Payment Solutions, proactivepaymentsolution.com. Help you with your point of sales operations, help you save some money, help you choose the right one for you. If you don't have a POS system, then you need to talk to him and he can set you up with the whole thing. And so it'll save you time, money, effort, and grief. Thank you to Paying Beagles over at Beagles Technology Solutions. He can turn your home into a smart home. He can help you with the consultation, the implementation, the purchasing, the whole 9 yards. And so he not just save you money on your heating bill, which will happen, but also just coordinate your home so it's a lot simpler. You know, I've got so many remotes lying around here, I don't know which one to use. But anyway, BeaglesTech.com is where you should check out his page, or at 817-944-3572, and he'll turn your home into a smart home. Also to Tiffany Griffin, the new issue should come out this week at Local Life Magazine. The last issue still online at locallifetx.com. You can check out the ads and the specials and the coupons and whatnot, but you should see it in your box probably by the end of the week. And it goes to 30,000 homes. So if you consider advertising in this area, you want to talk to her. And lastly, Burleson Radio, Live 365, playing your favorite hits right now. Your voice, your station. Okay. That being said, let's talk about what would happen if the Fed does indeed raise interest rates, as Chairman Powell has said. Right now, we have 29 trillion with a big T dollars and money that's owed by our federal government. A way to look at it in perspective is this: if you spent $1,000 every day from the birth of Jesus Christ to date, you still would not have spent $1 trillion. 1 trillion seconds is 30,000 years. Okay. And we owe 30,000 times 29, if you want to look at it like that. The amount of money that we owe probably precedes the creation of this planet, practically, if you want to look at it that way. But since the government can create the money it needs to pay its debts, people sometimes don't see it as a real issue. Last year, the government paid out, I'm looking on my notes here, $562.4 billion in interest payments to people who owned government securities. $562 billion just last year alone, $500 billion plus. Now, who owns this debt? I mentioned that the Social Security Fund owns some debt. The Fed owns a big piece. A lot of people think the Chinese own big debt, and they do. They own $1 trillion in debt. What happens is when we buy all this Chinese junk and they have American dollars, they can't use them in their own economy. So what they do is they buy American assets, including bonds. They also buy American companies and property with it too, but they will buy bonds. But the primary owners, about over half of the debt ownership is owned by banks, pension funds, insurance companies, state and local governments, including BISD, for example. Um, BISD is required by the state of Texas to have 3 months worth of money saved away, a rainy day fund in case of emergencies. And it's not sitting in a bag in Dr. Jimerson's office somewhere. It's in short-term securities. So they'll take the 3 months money and they will buy short-term securities with it. Either, and these securities can range from 90 days in length to 30 years and all points in between. Uh, so state and local governments have bonds, the banks I mentioned, investors, grandma or grandpa, could buy, government bonds. Hedge funds have them. A lot of the government bonds, the reason why people will still buy government bonds, even though the return isn't very high, is that it's a guaranteed return. The government guarantees the debt. So it's will you make more money in the stock market? Probably, but you also could lose all your money in the stock market. Whereas in the bonds, you're not going to make as much money, but you're not going to lose it as long as the United States government's solvent, which is, they talk about these deadlines like we passed in December and we're going to have one in February. That's just theater. No, don't worry about that. They're not going to let the bonds go bad. But so most of this money is owed to ourselves. And so that's why you get these people on the left in particular, they look at government debt and they say, well, it's providing a safe investment. It's going to be paid back. It gives us money now, but it's also going to be putting the debts on to our children, they say. Well, who put the debt on me? My parents. Who put the debt on them? Their parents. Where am I putting my debt? On my kids. Where are they going to put their debt? On their kids. They just kick that can down the road. And as long as the government can just keep creating money to pay the interest, it's going to happen. However, the interest rate of $562 billion is significant because that money is going to, it's going into the people who own the debt, but it's not going to schools, roads, military, pensions, uh, any of the government needs. It's not going into medical research. It's not going into other services the government provides. That money is become the third largest expenditure of our government. The largest is Social Security, and the second one is the military, and then this one. And Medicare is fast rising, so it'll probably pass all these pretty soon. But that money's it's not just going to China or Japanese investors. Actually, Japanese and British investors own more than the Chinese do. But it's not going out of the country. It is going into the pockets of the people who own the debt. But that's money that's not being used for governing purposes. And that's why an interest rate increase would just increase the amount of money that we're going to have to pay. If the government has to issue new bonds, which they do daily, I mean, literally daily, they issue new bonds, and the interest rate goes up, the only way they're going to get people to buy those bonds is at the higher rate of interest. Why would I buy a bond from the government 2% when now it's paying 2.25? And you say, well, 2.25, 2%, what's the difference? Well, if I'm buying $100 bond, nothing. All right, we're talking 20 cents. But if I'm buying tens of millions of dollars in bonds or more, that's a big difference. And I want that quarter point. And so they're going to have to raise their interest rate and pay more to the owner of that bond at the higher rates of interest. So every time they raise interest rates, it isn't just the interest rates that affect you and me on our credit cards and cars. It also affects how much money is the government going to have to pay out? And where does this money come from? A lot of it is, like I said, created. A lot of it's on taxes. And so it takes a bigger chunk of our tax increase. Now, here's where Biden's responsibility is in the Fed. Right now, he wants to appoint 3 people to the Fed, and he's given them instructions as to how they're to handle this job. It isn't going to be based on economic criteria. It's also going to be based on racial equity and climate change. Okay, and let me be very clear. He wants these people to incorporate racial equity and climate change considerations when it comes to deciding about lending practices in the government. Now, a good example is he wants it to make it harder for fossil fuel companies to borrow money because of their impact on the on the environment, according to him. He also wants to increase the ability of minority applicants to get loans, which sounds like a noble thing. But what that also means is that many of these applicants are going to be getting loans without the credit and collateral it takes to make them a good loan. This is exactly what happened in the 2000s that led to that meltdown in 2008. What you had was the government was greatly encouraging home ownership, so a lot of they were subsidizing a lot of the practices from groups like Countrywide and others to allow people to buy homes that they couldn't afford because that was the goal of the government to get home ownership. Well, what we're having here is they want to have loans that are directed towards minority applicants that may or may not have the credit or the collateral to make this a good loan. And so we're basically recreating the situation that occurred about 14 years ago, and with that massive meltdown. And it also, besides the economic impact, it's the political impact when you're basically saying that one group of borrowers is going to get priority over another, not based on their credit worthiness or their balance sheet, but because of who they are. And so they want to have an activist board of governors. That is 100% opposed to what the Federal Reserve is supposed to be about in the first place. It was supposed to be a nonpartisan, objective control of the money supply and credit and not use those powers for certain political ends. I'm going to say that again. What Joe Biden is trying to do, the Federal Reserve, violates everything that the Federal Reserve was created to do. It was not created to be an arm of the Democrat Party and to pursue Democrat policies. It was not created to do that for Republican policies either. And when Trump tried it, Jerome Powell told him to drop dead. And so did a lot of the Republicans in the Senate. Trump is trying to do what Joe Biden is doing now, and that is use the Federal Reserve for political gain. Trump failed. I don't know if Biden will succeed or not, but that's what we're happening here. So again, we're going to be having lending being made based on some other criteria. Now, Jordan also asked, how much credit or blame does the president get? In my opinion, it's like I've always used this analogy in class. It's like a football coach. You know, it does make a difference, but he can't be responsible if somebody gets hurt on the field or the star wide receiver drops a winning touchdown pass. But on the other hand, the coach is responsible for training the players and putting in the game plan and making the decisions during the game. So some things are out of his control, but some things are definitely within the president's control. And so far, Joe Biden, I think, is fair to say, has not been a positive impact on the economy. They say, well, look at all the jobs that have been created. Well, yes, considering that the measuring point that they bring you from is from the very bottom of the COVID recession 2 years ago, and they bring it forward, say, since this time, look at all these jobs that are being created. Well, it's an arbitrary measure. We still haven't recovered the jobs that we lost fully from the COVID pandemic we've had for the last 2 years. We're still below that level by a healthy margin. So when Joe Biden wants to strut his stuff and say he exceeds expectations like he did in that press conference a couple of weeks ago, know what he's talking about. He's basing his comparison on the very lowest of the low. It's so second of all, inflation's gone through the roof, and some of that has to do with supply side issues, problems in China and problems in COVID worldwide. But again, it's like when you're the president, you're like the coach. You have to make these audibles during the game and make these changes. And Joe Biden hasn't done that. We still have massive, massive delays in our ports, 100 days or more where ships out to sea. We have massive amount of containers that are yet to be shipped. Could that be changed by Joe Biden? Not 100%, but there are some things he could do. They could waive some of the issues about trucking, for example. Okay, Antonio Basello says, weren't most jobs in the past 2 years brought up by Trump? Trump had a very positive job creation in his 4 years until COVID hit. It's 3 years, I guess, if you want to look at it like that. And so by the time, but right before COVID hit, we were at an all-time high in terms of jobs and people working, and then everything went crap. But But back to the shipping crisis, is Joe Biden responsible for those ships being stuck out there? Partially, because California and other states have such restrictive trucking arrangements and requirements and environmental issues, and unions have such strict rules that he hasn't really been able to do anything about that because he won't. So, yeah, it's not his fault that COVID hit China and hit some of those supply lines. It's not his fault that some of the problems in the climate maybe have cut down certain produce imports, but it didn't really matter because the things that we could handle, he hasn't handled. So he is partially responsible for that. Oh, somebody just jumped in. It looks like some, I don't know, Russian or Ukrainian. I don't know who that is. It didn't matter. Um, um, Second of all, when it comes to uh, starting businesses and all this, taxes do play a role in it. And when you increase taxes on businesses, there is going to be restriction on some economic output. Now, I have been on the record saying I am not a big fan of corporate taxes, and people, want to misinterpret that and say it's because of, trickle down Republican and all this other business. I am a very lukewarm supporter of trickle down. Does it work? The answer is sorta, like every other economic theory. Sounds good on paper, works a little bit in practice, but nothing like what they say. It's sorta is the best answer. Sorta Keynesian is sorta, all these theories out there you want to talk about sorta work in the real world because there's so many factors you can't account for. But the point is also is that when you put a lot of restrictions on doing business, taxes, environmental restrictions, climate change restrictions, racial equity restrictions, it is going to raise the cost of doing business. And whatever benefit you get from these things it does translate into dollars and cents. That's the fact of life. Now, I don't want people dumping their crap in the rivers. I don't want, factories pumping their smoke nonstop. So we pay the extra price to try to keep our rivers and air clean. Okay. We pay yeah, it'd be a lot cheaper for most factories just to dump their crap into the river. But because we don't want to live like that, we have restrictions, but it does raise costs. And we pay those costs because it's worth it to us. And I'm fine with that. I don't wanna have uninspected food. I don't want people to work in unsafe places, so we pay the extra cost that goes with inspecting the food, making sure it's safe, and making sure the workers aren't gonna be putting themselves at risk. But you can't get around the fact it does cost money, and many of the restrictions that Joe Biden has put into place make it even more difficult to access credit or to start a business or whatever else. Um, I talked about this with the king of Kiowa County, my cousin, a lot about packing plants and meat packing. Meat prices gone through the roof, primarily because they're controlled by about 4 companies. About 85% of the beef comes out of 4 companies. Why don't we have other companies that create their own small packing plants like we used to have 40 years ago? It'd be so cost prohibitive that nobody will try it because of all the restrictions that are placed upon it. Okay. The regulation overload and the restrictions placed on new businesses and the taxes that are required and mandates about wages and all these things make it very, very difficult. Now, if we as a society are willing to pay $50 for, a meal for 4 at Chick-fil-A, knowing that these things are in place, okay, pork over the money, here's your sandwich, fine, that if that's what you want, but it's becoming more and more difficult for that to happen. And my concern is with all this is that inflation is not gonna get any better. And we also I wanna sidetrack just for a second, back to the employment issue. I was just looking at my notes. We have more people not working today than ever before as a percentage of our adult population. When they brag about the unemployment rate at 3.9%, forget that. The unemployment rate only applies to people that are out of a job that are looking for a job, and if you're not considered looking for a job, you're not gonna be incorporated in that unemployment rate, and this is no Biden conspiracy. They've been doing this since the '30s. I've often thought this is a bogus measure anyway. So when Trump was strutting his stuff about the lower interest rates, or sorry, the lower unemployment rates, Yeah, they were coming down, but it doesn't really state the true picture of how many people are just not working. And we've had more people that are eligible to work not working than ever before. And the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal have article after article after article about the great retirement, as it's called, or the great resignation, as the Post put it the other day, the great resignation, because people are just not working for whatever reason. Maybe they don't have to, maybe they don't want to, maybe they're content to do less. Maybe because the government sponsored so many social programs, they figured they can get by without having to work as much, if at all. So all these things are there. And so to sum up all this I've talked about, Joe Biden is responsible for this economy to a large degree. I don't blame him for droughts in South America. What I blame him for is that he hasn't come up with a plan to deal with that. I don't blame him for COVID in China shutting down some of their factories. What I blame is, why are we making all our stuff in China anyway? Where's his policy to bring jobs here? Why are we making, like the semiconductor chips that just shut down the new car industry practically? Why are we not making them here? Why are we not dealing with the crisis in our ports being so overloaded that it's a 3-month wait to be unloaded, and then that's just to get it off the ship, not into the economy? Or how about a situation where we worry about trying to get businesses off the ground instead of trying to make sure they're woke? We don't need to worry about racial equity and climate change all the time. We can't sometimes we need to do what's best for the economy. And does that mean abandon civil rights and, equality? Of course not. It didn't mean abandon any of those things, but it doesn't mean we need to burden our businesses with so many of these burdens that we can't operate as an economy. And we need to understand that when we choose non-economic results from our economy, such as, taking care of the environment and climate change, it's going to cost us money. If you're going to try to move us away from fossil fuels, and that's a whole nother conversation I'm going to have at a later date about how the battery situation isn't the solution to all our problems. Sorry, Taylor, I don't mean to hit you about the Tesla, but I might on that show. But the point about all this we're talking about is that Joe Biden is responsible for the large part of this economy. Some things happen that may be out of his control, but it's up to him to try to get them under control or to adjust to them, and he has done none of those things. And he's imposing a political orthodoxy on our economy and on our credit system that is just going to lead to ruin. It's going to lead to increased costs, decreased credit access, decreased home building and buying, decreased car buying, decreased appliances buying at Best Buy, decreased anything that's done on a consumer credit basis. And that's where his policies are heading us right now. If people think that 6 months when the economy is going to be doing better, they're dreaming. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I may be wrong. I was wrong once. I think it was 1978, but that was a long time ago. I may be wrong, but from what I'm reading, this is going to be with us for a while, and he has shown no inclination of changing course. One of my main complaints about Build Back Better wasn't just all the woke aspects of it. It'd be like pouring gas on a fire in terms of our inflation. So to sum all this up, I appreciate Jordan's questions. If y'all have questions like this, just contact me. If I could get them in the show, I will. Or if I've already referred to them, I may be able to help you with a podcast that I did in the past. But I hope you share this with your friends. This is on YouTube, and I hope I explained things as clearly as I could without use of graphics and drawing on the whiteboard and all this other stuff. And hope you are able to grasp what I was trying to tell you. Thank you for listening. We'll see you tomorrow. I don't know what I'm talking about tomorrow. I have an idea, but I'm going to hold off on that. So let's talk about our sponsors as we leave. Thank you, Daniel, CrossFit Burleson, 317 Southwest Wilshire. Check out the webpage, crossfitburleson.com. get to know them, get to know what they're about. Thank you, Shandy. I know she has a couple of homes she's closing on at the Stocksdale Realty Group, turning transactions into relationships. So if you want to talk to her about what I've been talking about, the interest rates, I'm going to have her on the show, I'm sure, within the next 6 to 7 weeks, and she'll be able to talk about this. Same with Rex. He'll be on here probably within the next 6 or 7 weeks and giving us his witty spin on things. So hit myfinancialbox.com, hit the link, get to know him, get to see the video. Thank you, Rex. Thank you, Kimmy, over at Optavia, 817-789-1622. I'll see you Wednesday, I hope. Thank you to Gayla. I hope to see you Wednesday, too. Jordan, thank you. She says, it was very clear. I can't believe it went by so fast. Well, that's just, when you're captivated by the material. What can you say? Anyway, Southern Jim, thank you, Gayla. It's coming up for Valentine's, so check it out for repair, cleaning, design, new jewelry. She got the whole 9 yards. Thank you to Otto. Take your sweetie to Valentine's Day lunch or something like that. It's a nice romantic place. Otto is just that kind of guy. He'll come by and sing to you if you want. Our place on the highway in Allsbury since 1986. Thank you to Chris over at Wild Cigar and Culture. Be checking out the ball games at the Super Bowl. I'm sure it's going to be a big blast. And so we're going to check that out. It's a nice place to go and watch a game and have a drink and smoke and have intelligent conversation. So thank you, Chris. Thank you to Antonio for listening. Also for Proactive Payment Solutions, proactivepaymentsolution.com, and help you with your point of sales operations, help you save some of this money, and you're going to need it. Oh boy. So proactivepaymentsolution.com. If you don't have a system yet for point of sales, he'll help you with that. Thank you to Payne Beagles over at Beagles Technology Solutions. Hang on, I'm getting a little dry. There we go. Beagles Technology Solutions. Check out beaglestech.com and help you find out how you can turn your home into a smart home. 817-944-3572. He's standing by the phone right now, no doubt. And also to Tiffany, I look forward to seeing your new issue this week. Hope you're doing well. LocalLifeTX.com. I'm going to have her on probably sometime pretty soon, not just for our usual conversation about Burleson business, but also we're going to talk about her role as a mother in the Centennial after prom party. That's a big deal because that's a mammoth job. So I want to help give her some community outreach on that. So we'll talk to y'all, her when she's got her schedule. And lastly, rock out with Burleson Radio, your voice, your station, Live 365, playing your favorite hits right now. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I appreciate it. I appreciate particularly Jordan for giving me such a good prompt here. It's always easier sometimes to respond and then wake up in the middle and I go, what am I talking about? But I'll be talking about something tomorrow that equally is fascinating, no doubt. I'll see you then.